Yeah, and welcome from my side. My name is Langner, and I'm very happy to talk to you about AI-enhanced systems engineering in the medical engineering field today. I'm going to start with talking briefly about challenges in the medical technology engineering sector. Before I talked about generative AI, we've heard a lot about it today, but I want to cover capabilities and shortcomings of these technologies, and then head into our approach of building robust AI solutions. And I'm going to conclude with a short example just to show you how we use our approach. Oh, sorry. So about the challenges, the first challenge I picked to talk about is the highly regulated area that the medical sector lives in. We have a lot of standards, norms, and laws that apply, and we also have country-specific laws. For example, if you want to bring a product to the market in the US, there's a completely different set of laws than if you want to bring it in the market in Germany. Furthermore, the laws and regulations are quite complex. So, for example, they can be cross-functional. So we have dependencies between developments and functions that we have to think of when engineering these products. And on top of that, all this regulatory framework is evolving. So the laws and norms and regulations are updated, and we have to keep track of that, and we have to incorporate that into our existing engineering processes and future processes as well. Secondly, the systems we are engineering themselves are complex and safety critical. We're talking about human life here, so we have to be very careful when engineering these systems. Furthermore, these systems are beginning to become system of systems. If we're thinking about the operation room setting, we have devices from different manufacturers, and they're beginning to exchange data and to cooperate and to solve tasks together. So for a testing perspective, for example, this becomes quite complex if we have to test different devices in cooperation just to make them do a task. And lastly, all of these challenges have to be done under quite stringent requirements concerning traceability, concerning correctness and robustness. This leads to documentation overhead, or documentation work, not overhead, and reporting, but also we have to be quite careful when engineering the requirements, mapping them onto components, tracing them throughout the engineering or development process, and then afterwards testing them. Yeah, I've picked these three challenges today because they have two things in common. The first thing is currently they lead to tasks that are quite labor-intensive and are done manually. And secondly, these tasks are around textual processing. So they all have in common that we use a lot of text either as an input or as an output. Oops. This leads me to generative AI. You all have heard about generative AI by now. In some form or other, you have used it. Tools like ChatGPT, Google Gemini are out there that are basically chatbots transforming a user query into a generated answer. But these tools are quite more. They are highly capable text processing tools. They are able to process large amounts of data if used correctly, and they can be adapted to different use cases and different tasks. They can not only be chatbots. Further research that has gone into these tools leads to techniques like reasoning and tool usage, which makes these models even more powerful. They can become more independent, do more complex tasks, but in the end become agentic tools. So if you think about our development process, it's very easy to come up with a lot of examples where these models can be used to some extent. For example, we can start with the regulatory framework. We can start processing all the regulatory laws and norms that are relevant, combine them into one cohesive framework, and derive requirements to our products or for our products from this. We can then map these requirements onto system components, and on the right side, we can start creating test cases automatically. It's all text. We can generate it with these models. We can also generate test data for our test cases, or even understand and help with the certification process, for example. Yeah, so sounds too good to be true. Almost. We have shortcomings of these models, which are, in my experience, quite important to know and to understand if we are using generative AI in such a critical domain. The first shortcoming I want to talk about is how we task these models. So-called prompt engineering is basically just written text where we tell these models what they should do in form of a system prompt. And changing small words in these system prompts leads to very different behavior, which is quite hard to control if we want to ensure their safety and the kind of way they are working. Yeah, if we also incorporate the user, having a user prompt, the input space becomes infinite and very hard to adapt or to foresee in the engineering. Yeah, perfect. The second shortcoming I want to talk about is these models, as most AI models are black boxes. We have basically no traceability of the information that goes into the model to the output the model produces. And there are techniques like reasoning, like chain of thought, you might have heard of them. They seem suggest traceability, but they have actually proven not to be traceability. The third thing we have to think about is the knowledge representation. These models are trained on very large internet scale amounts of data, and there's a lot of information that already goes into these models. But we don't know, as users, we do not know which kind of information has been used for the training. So for example, there might have been some form of regulation that we actually want to use that has been used in the training. But we do not know which version of this law was used, and we also do not know which connections the model actually learned from the training. So using this implicit knowledge is quite dangerous. Therefore, we should use explicit knowledge, and we have to think about how do we present these models with the knowledge we want to use. We want them to use. So there's RAG systems, we've heard about them, but we need to think about how do we put all the knowledge that we have, all the data into this RAG system, how do we connect the data points, and even for documents, how do we use more complex elements in these documents? So very challenging in the regulation and law area are tables, are graphs that have to be treated especially than text or other than text. Here then going towards the output, a basic principle of these models is that they are probabilistic. That makes them so powerful, but also quite tricky to handle. They have just a probabilistic behavior of producing the next token, and this propagates throughout their token generation. So there's a chance 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100 that these models just generate a token that we haven't foreseen or that isn't quite optimal in this case, and therefore the answer is not what we think or what it should be. Although everything before was quite right, we have done it the same way we've always done it, and just different behavior nonetheless. And lastly, I want to talk about evaluation. If we are using these models in safety-critical environments, we need to think about evaluating these models. And for text-based output, especially for longer texts, there is no automation, and this makes it quite hard. Furthermore, we have to think about randomness, the probabilistics I just talked about. So if we use the same input, use our toolchain, execute it 10 times, the answer will always different quietly or slightly. And it's very hard to evaluate this. Then again, we have to think about what's good. Do we want a long answer? Do we want a short answer? What is precise? If for natural language, it's really hard to say. And all this needs a lot of data. Yes, with all these shortcomings, still generative AI is a very powerful tool. And now I want to talk about how we can use it to build robust tools. So the first thing that from our experience is super important is to split this magic tool into smaller, more handleable subtasks. So to break out the black box, have subtasks that are quite more clear what the model has to do in these subtasks, and define intermediate results. So now we have not only one input, a long workflow and an output, but we have intermediate results that we can look at, and we can check what the model is actually doing if these tasks are done right by the model. And that's basically what we have to do. We have to evaluate each subtask and can then start by optimizing this workflow. So if we just have an end-to-end solution, or if we have a solution where we have no intermediate results and we change stuff, we have just actually no idea what is happening, and if you're actually improving the model or if you're making things worse. And so now we have a solution or a way that we can do it systematically, and that is quite important. I want to talk a bit further about evaluation. The first thing that is crucial is making changes measurable. So start by building evaluation benchmark data sets and work from there. These benchmark data sets need to be tailored to the problem and to the task. So depending on the problem you're trying to solve, use domain experts for this, because they know the task better than you, and they know the task, the results they actually want to get out of this task even better. The second thing, I talked about it, are the probabilistics. So if you come out of a domain where it's normal to run a test once, it is really crucial with generative AI to run tests multiple times in order to see if the model is actually just randomly correct or randomly incorrect, and then you can assess the relative accuracy and relative performance. And you can discriminate between the model being sometimes wrong and the model being all the time wrong, and it's completely different in the error handling and the reasons why the model is behaving in such a way. And lastly, with all these variables, all these options that we can optimize, we need to automate the evaluation process, because we are going to have a lot of iterations to improve the model. We use structured machine-readable inputs and outputs, making the evaluation automatable, so we can use keywords or we can use typed data points that we actually can compare automatically. If you have to have a natural language answer, there might be techniques like LLM as a judge that also can help there. Yeah, I want to show you what I've talked about in a brief example. For example, a user wants to clarify whether or not some norm or regulation is applicable for him. And this could be typed into ChatGPT. You would get an answer. From our experience, that answer might be wrong more often than it is right. And it's not really trustworthy. At least for us, when we see such an answer, it's not quite clear how the model came to this conclusion. So once again, split the task into subtasks. The first one is crucial, clarifying the context, because oftentimes the user has just incomplete information. And thereby these models don't even have the chance to give a correct and precise answer because context is missing. Secondly, we check if the law is applicable. Then we actually check if there are other laws relevant, linked in the document, for example. And with all this information gathered, we then check what consequences this has and give a more trustworthy and complete answer. And for the second subtask, the law applicability, I just want to showcase some brief examples. We've done exactly what I talked about, built some data sets with the query part, so some user input or model input, and the ground truth labeled by experts. And we split that in a product and a location category. So for the question, does the MDR reply? It's just not. It's just undecidable because there is no context given about the product or the location. The same example, slight variation. With a medical device in Germany, it's quite clear the MDR has to be applied to. And for the fitness app in the USA, it's clearly not applicable. And then we can run, as I talked about, these tests multiple times, and we see the model is actually able to answer the question for the medical device in Germany. It sometimes makes an error, and we can now reason about why these errors occur and what might improve the model. But for the USA use case or example, the model is wrong all the time, and this is because there might be because some information is missing. So it might not know that the fitness app is not MDR relevant. And now we have an opportunity to reason about what was the cause of the error, and we can more stringently fix the problem by, for example, modeling our data or giving the model more data. Yeah, I'm coming to a conclusion. I hope I could make my points that generative AI is quite a powerful tool, but we have to be really careful when using it in safety-critical domains like medical device engineering. And we have to think about how we can use these models systematically, how we can engineer them in order to make them trustworthy. Thank you very much for your attention.